Welcome to the Today's Leader podcast. Building tomorrow's best leaders, today.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul, I see you. All right, Brown, let's finish. Coach Carl.
Great job, guys.
Hey there, it's Coach Curl here, and welcome to episode 418 of the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders. Today, resilience gets spoken about a lot in today's world. The need to have resilience to be successful is a common concept that people will share and talk to. Now, we hear a lot of stories about it, and of course, there are some people that feel it's got like this almost magical quality about it. There are others that feel that it's unattainable. But for those leaders, whether you feel it's magical or whether you feel it's unattainable, we've got a gift for you. Today's guest is Paul Glover, who will share with us how you can build the skill sets behind resilience. You see, in 1994, Paul was a successful federal court trial attorney. In 1995, he was a convicted felon, serving 7 years of incarceration in a federal prison. Now, how Paul and his family managed to overcome the personal and professional setback that he inflicted on himself is a story of resilience. And it's how he's now been able to build a successful national coaching practice. So he has his own personal case study about overcoming adversity and setbacks through resilience and grit. Now, Paul's message to those who hear him speak is, we don't succeed in spite of our losses, but because of them. And that is one of the foundations around the concept that Paul speaks to. So after a word from our sponsor, please welcome Paul Glover to the Today's Leader podcast.
The podcast is brought to you by Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders today. Please welcome the author of Workquake. Please welcome Paul Glover. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Tony. First, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to have this dialogue with you and also to speak to your audience. Much appreciated.
No worries. It's something I always look forward to having these conversations, Paul, and yours looks particularly interesting. I've seen some of your video content and I'm really looking forward to listening to your style of leadership coaching. And of course, I've got some really good curious questions that I want to tap into. But before we get there, please share the Paul Glover story.
The Paul Glover story is as with most people's, is much more complicated than we think it is. I believe that everybody's life is a compilation of stories, and mine goes from being a hardworking guy who worked nights to go through law school, became a very successful trial lawyer, associated with bad people. I tell people I was a bad guy wannabe. I never quite made it over the edge, but I associated with those who were definitely bad.
Yeah.
And that behavior, as well as my blind spots, which I did not recognize, led me to commit felonies. And I ended my law career by spending 5.5 years in prison.
Wow.
When I got out, and rightfully so, I can no longer practice law. And I have to admit, law was my passion. And when I got out, I had to make some decisions about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I had gone through a transformation in prison, realizing that I needed to change, that transformation was required for me.
Yeah.
And I did it after 5.5 years. By the way, I don't recommend that process to everybody else. Mine was forced upon me because, as I tell people, I'm a slow learner.
Yeah.
And I spent the first 2 years in prison plotting revenge. and would not accept the responsibility for being there. Only after a couple of things that forced me into reflection. One was for where I was at, a white collar criminal in a federal prison camp. I started to see people that had been there when I started my prison term returning. And the realization that if you do not change, you are forced to do the act of insanity,
Yeah.
the same thing over and over again, and expecting a different result. But then the second thing that finally came home to me was how devastated my family had been by my acts. I left them financially destitute and emotionally damaged because of the fact that they did not know who I really was. And only coming to grips with the fact of my responsibility and the harm that I had caused them. And by the way, Tony, let me tell you that anybody who serves 5 years in prison usually does not get out with a family left intact.
I'd imagine.
And
Yeah.
I made the decision that this was not my choice. It was my wife and my two sons' choice as to whether or not, when I got out, I could rejoin the family. And I recognized that the only way that was going to happen is if I did the transformation. And so I spent 3 years reflecting and changing and transforming by recognizing what had caused me to commit the acts that I did. And I call them blind spots.
Yeah.
And we all have them.
Yeah.
Part of it is our psychology, our personality, and the ones that I had put me in a position to be manipulated, but willingly. I don't try to escape my responsibility for this. But I tell people that if you don't know what your blind spots are, shame on you, because everybody else does. And you can easily be manipulated if people know your blind spots. So when I got out of prison, I now had to decide what to do with my very much damaged career. And I came to the conclusion that I would be a very good coach. The variety of experiences, both being a trial lawyer and also being an ex-felon, had exposed me to experiences that I felt were valuable to share. And so I put together a coaching program, and I bill myself as the no BS workplace development coach because that's who I am.
Yeah.
And I believe authenticity is required. And I took those experiences and I put them together, and I found that it worked. That those people who occupy the C-suite need someone who will tell them the truth about them and their behavior, and also share with them that the concept of being infallible no longer works.
Yeah.
You're not infallible, and by the way, you will face failure. It is inevitable. So my contention is, instead of running from failure, you embrace it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You learn from it, and you make it a part of your experience so that you can get better. And I find that most people have exactly the different view. They run from failure. They stay in their comfort zone because they're afraid to fail. And I tell my coaching clients, failure will come for you. I don't care where you are. Stay in your comfort zone. It's still coming. So guess what? Take the risk, step outside your comfort zone, embrace failure, and move on, improve.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? Because can I tell you, I'd much rather failing if I'm stretching and challenging myself than if I'm just sitting there on the couch, you know. So if I'm in my comfort zone and I'm failing, that's not a great place to be. A couple of things that I just want to pick up on. So first up, you talked about the first 2 years plotting the revenge, and the reality is, for a lot of people, they find themselves in a situation they automatically look for someone else to blame. It seems to be an automatic human condition that we have. We just say, who's to blame for this? And it does take a while. Often I remember an instant that I had in my corporate career where it took me 2 days to face up to the fact that I actually played a role in this. It wasn't just that person's fault. What did I do that created that environment? 2 days. So when I'm when you were talking about 2 years, I'm thinking, my God, couldn't I have gone down that rabbit hole if I'd allowed it to be? And of course, we're talking vastly different scenarios, I guess, a life in jail as opposed to, something bad that happened in the workplace. And then you talked about the communication to the C-suite, having the communication that they need to hear, the conversations that should happen and mostly don't, because people are telling people what they believe they want them to hear. So I think that robust conversation, that robust feedback is something that leaders absolutely need to have somewhere within their organization. So how do you work with them to create that?
Well, first, you're actually spot on. It is extraordinary to me. When I started coaching a coaching relationship, one of the first things that I require is that the leader do a 360-degree review with those people who report to him directly and who he works with cross-functionally. First, my opinion about his communication style is irrelevant until I get to know him, right? However, the people he communicates with on a regular basis, a daily basis, that he absolutely needs to understand what his expectations are, whether they're reasonable or unreasonable. So we get the results of the communication 360 as well as other areas, but this one in particular is always where I like to start, because the leader believes he's a fantastic communicator.
Yeah.
And a part of the 360 is I have them do the same 360 as a self-evaluation. So now we have the metrics of saying, let's look at your score in that area and let's look at your score. And inevitably there is a chasm.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, it's not that he thinks he's poor and they think he's great. That's not the way it works. And they're shocked by that. They really are. And I tell them, that's because you believe in telepathy. You think that if you think it, they hear it. So let's talk about the fact that that's not how communication works.
Yeah.
So we actually start that process, but I also tell them, I always like to relate at least a story. The first 2 trials that I had when I graduated from law school, I lost. And there was an old expert trial attorney who watched both trials. And after the second trial, he came up to me and said, look, for the price of a steak dinner, I'll tell you why you're losing. Well, I just spent 3 years' salary on going to law school, so I thought the cost of a steak dinner to learn how to win is a cheap deal. By the way, it wasn't the steak dinner, but it was the bottle of scotch he drank at about bankruptcy. So we sat down and he said, look, you're really good at presenting the facts, but you're not telling the story. And if you don't tell the story, you cannot engage the jury because they want a story from you.
Yeah.
It has to have the facts in it, but it has to be interwoven into a narrative. And when I talk about communication with my clients, it's that. You need to determine the story you have to tell to engage your people. And I like the concept of the hero journey.
Yeah.
I believe most of us have that story in us. We don't recognize it. And by the way, the nice thing about the hero's journey is there has to be adversity for you to be a hero.
Yeah.
You can't be a hero without the challenge, right? I tell people, when you're walking down the wooded path and the wolf appears, you have to somehow figure out how to get around the wolf. But without the wolf, you're not a hero. And it suddenly changes their perspective, because the hero's journey requires authenticity and vulnerability, which leaders just do not like, right? Because we've been taught incorrectly we must be infallible. As a leader, we must show no weakness. We must know every answer. Seriously? Are you one of the Marvel superheroes? Because this is not a real human.
Yeah.
So once we have that conversation, then we start to talk about fashioning that narrative based on not the leader's journey, but the organization's hero journey. Where are they going as a group, together, a team, right? Rather than I'm going to lead you, it's let's choose this path, define it, and then follow it. because we have an end game. We have the purpose. We have the mission.
Yeah.
And we identify that. And I tell them, not everybody's going to go with you.
Yeah.
You know, but you're also not the Marine Corps. It's okay to leave someone behind. So you do that. And that to me is where we suddenly have a robust interaction of communication. Because every time a leader communicates, it should be about the journey.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
everybody's place in it.
Yeah, it makes so much sense, Paul. It really does. And I guess, one of the things that I'm really curious about is the concept of storytelling from a leadership perspective. And I like how you've equated it to the story of the organisation or the journey of the organisation. And I'm just thinking back on the organisations that I worked with, for example, in my corporate days, and I can certainly reflect and have experiences where I've done that. From an individual leadership perspective, how do the question I get asked a lot, how do I share my story in a way that's going to come across as, here in Australia, especially, Paul, we have the tall poppy syndrome. We don't want to big note ourselves. We don't want to say stuff that people can knock us down for. But as you said, everyone's got a story. Everyone's got, whether it's a hero story or another type of story. How can I, as a leader, share my story authentically with the teams that I lead, the people that I lead, without it coming across as, aren't I good or aren't I great?
Well, first, I like to tell people everyone loves a good story. I mean, that is a part of our DNA back to when we were on the savannah and everybody was around the campfire. Right?
Yeah.
The storyteller is the one that entertained us. He enthralled us. He gave us purpose. So I look at the leader and I go, that's your job.
Yeah.
If you don't know what your job is, let me tell you what it is. If you are the leader, you provide purpose, but you also provide entertainment. And I find it so interesting how, first, what you say is absolutely true. And my discourse with them about communication is all about authenticity and vulnerability, but it also has to have some humor.
Yeah.
People need to laugh. The day-to-day struggle is hard, and if a leader can inject a little bit of levity into the story, people relax. So my contention is that first you have to meet people on a personal basis. If you think you're going to develop a story that resonates without being personal, and by the way, this is something there's a lot of pushback on, because everybody's been taught you should be professional. Right?
Yeah.
That's how we've grown our leaders that way. That's why they have a barrier in front of them, this veneer of professionalism that does not let them show through. So I say the first thing is you've got to destroy that. It's got to go away because that doesn't work anymore, especially since the pandemic.
Yeah.
The pandemic requires personal touch. It does to say that you can't be professional, of course, but it requires a personal touch if you want to interact with someone on a meaningful basis. Otherwise, send them a memo. Yeah. So you've got to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
One of the things that I require, or I pretty much require, I actually have a lot of requirements for people that are in my coaching program. The first one is, do you have a third shift?
Yeah.
And if they say yes, I go, when was the last time you visited? Crickets.
Yeah.
Right? Because well, wait a minute, the third shift starts at midnight. You mean I have to get up and go? Yeah. Unless you want them to be a separate company. So I said, so what you do is you unannounced, you get up, you go to the facility, you go in and you sit down in the break room. Now, the first time you do that, they'll call the police because they have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
Right? Someone broke in. The third time you do this, so they suddenly realize you want to hear what they have to say, they will tell you. And based on that, you now take that information and you weave it into the story, because that gives you a chance to have a dialogue, not a monologue. Most leaders are most comfortable having monologues.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get down and you get down and dirty, right? And you hear what they have to say and you make that a part of the story. Why? The team has got to be traveling with you.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand where they are and the experiences that they are experiencing, you can't make it a relevant story. And of course, what you say is, well, I never knew that. Let me tell you something similar. Because I guarantee you, we all have similar experiences because we're human beings. It just has to be formatted correctly. But in that dialogue, you're able to say, I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you start off going, I'm going to show you mine,
Yeah.
right? Because that's when they believe it's true. When they hear you say something, my wife and I, with our children, our two sons, decided that at some point they had gotten to the age where they could lie to us and we might not know. Just because the mom, the mom look,
Yeah.
the kid, you look at them and they just drop to their knees and sob and confess. Well, at some point they figure out that's not lethal. It ain't gonna kill them. So we decided that we had to try something different. And we
Yeah.
did, once a month we had free night. After dinner, you could tell us anything you wanted and there were no repercussions.
Wow. Yeah.
None. Radical candor, right? And so the first couple of times they were like, this is a joke. And
Yeah.
we can't trust you. Right? Because if I tell you what I really did Friday night, you're gonna ground me and call my friends' parents and get them in trouble.
Yeah.
So of course my deal was I'm going to tell you about stuff that I did. So that you can see that I'm actually a human being that used to be your age. And you tell them a story about your childhood that they can relate to where
Yeah.
you did something you weren't supposed to do. Now, at first my wife was like, are you sure this isn't encouragement? We want to encourage you to do. I said, well, all right, listen. We'll embellish what we have to, so that
Yeah.
none of them are crimes, though. So and with that, they opened up, and they would.
Yeah.
We finally said, you'll notice I'm bald. That's why. And at some point, free night was killing me. So,
Yeah.
so at one time you say, no, I don't want to know anymore. Stop. So I believe that leaders have got to engage in that free night with their employees, where they believe that there is no repercussions. This creates psychological safety.
Yeah.
And see, that's what's missing in most conversations in the workplace. I'm afraid to tell you the truth because you have positional authority, and if you don't like what I say, there's going to be repercussions.
Yeah.
So nobody talks. They're
Yeah.
like, no, I'm good. So no, once you've brought them into that conversation, they are much more likely to tell you the truth when you ask, but you have to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, great story, and that opportunity to be vulnerable is obviously a leader's responsibility and accountability. One of the biggest success stories that I could ever share in relation to my corporate career was I followed a good friend of mine into a store with one of the companies I worked with, and these stores are big box retail, and there's 150 odd people, and my best friend who managed the store prior to me didn't leave on the world's best terms. So it was either, that you jump or we're going to push scenario. And everyone in that store knew that we were best friends. So of course, the day I walk in to take over, everyone's on edge because they're just expecting the big broom to come out and start again. And what I effectively did during that period of time, it was like 3 weeks, and seriously also, Paul, my direct report was telling me that's what I should do, just get in there, find the culprits and get them out. And I did something completely different. I spent probably the first 3 weeks having more coffees than a man should ever have. I had one-on-ones, I had small group meetings. I wanted to know what the problems were, and I had a fairly good idea what the problems were, and unfortunately some of that rested with my best mate. But I needed to hear it from them. And from there, we were like bottom of the pops in just about everything at that particular time in that store's career. Within 18 months, we were store of the year. So it was just an incredible turnaround. And I put a lot down to the fact that I didn't go in there with judgment or with, the big broom. I wanted to hear it from them. I knew they were good people. We just needed to ignite them again. And so the behaviour of me having to stave off my direct report, who was looking for quick action, for me to get in there and just understand it, and then we made the change together, was just such a fantastic highlight. But I needed to be vulnerable with that, and I needed to be honest with what I was, the pressure that I was under, and feeling, and what I wanted to achieve prior to them ever being able to open up. So I can certainly resonate with that. So I think we've all got stories like that where we've been able to be vulnerable, be honest, and our team have responded.
Well, and you were a wise man. Let me tell you that what the way the methodology you used was spot on. It's always interesting when every once in a while a company hires me to do focus groups because they've got a serious problem, right? Something's wrong, and people are waiting to be asked what the issues are.
Yeah.
And when they sit down with me, groups of 8 to 10, a complete stranger.
Yeah.
And the only thing I tell them is there is psychological safety here because I will not reveal anybody's name that tells me anything. And in a group setting, now they obviously have to trust each other, they won't talk, but just crazy as it is, they will tell me everything needed to correct the issue. And of course, I'm thinking, I'm being paid as an outsider to come and sit down. The leader cannot do this? No, because he would not open himself up to say, tell me the issues, tell me the problems.
Yeah.
And you were willing to do that, and people will respond. My contention is, if you want to know what's wrong, ask the person that's in the process. They know what's wrong, but they're not telling you. You've got to ask. You've got to invite them in, ask them, let them know they're safe doing it, and then you know what you have to do? You have to take action.
Yeah. You've got to show that you haven't just listened, that you've done something with the information. And ultimately, Paul, with my story, when I got up after that 3 weeks and we had a team meeting and we set the plan and I shared the plan, they saw what they'd spoken to me about in the plan, and they were like dumbfounded that, wow, he listened to us, and there it is. Now it wasn't, to me, it wasn't rocket science. It was just what I believed needed to happen. But it's so different. And I know that I'm starting to push the time limit here, but I do have a question that I really want to ask about blind spots, because blind spots.
But if I could, please, I hate to interrupt, but you made them a part of the hero journey.
Yeah.
You see, you did. And once they're a part of that, you've got their discretionary effort, which you can't buy. Everybody wants to buy effort. You can't buy discretionary effort. You only buy time. And once you made them a part of the journey, they willingly go that extra mile to achieve.
Yeah.
Sorry, but you obviously tripped that trigger with how you did it.
It's certainly one of my most treasured memories in my leadership, operational leadership career. Now, one of the questions that I've got is about blind spots. Now, you've talked about them a little bit during the process, and everyone's got them. I mean, I remember meeting when I took the jump and started to become a coach myself. I remember meeting another coach, and I was just talking to her, and she's, oh my God, I can see your blind spots. And I'm going, oh, can you? And so ever since that day, there've been a little bit of an intrigue for me. But how do you help leaders discover their blind spots? You talked about the 360, and I'm sure that that's part of the journey. But how else? Because some people will read a 360 and still not believe it. They still won't see their blind spots. So how do you work with someone who's like almost hell-bent on not seeing their blind spots?
Well, and as you well know, some people refuse to be coached. They won't accept reality, and therefore, if you keep telling them, they're like, well, I don't like this. I don't like hearing this. So as the relationship grows, the 360 gives me my basis to intrude and go, here's an issue. Now, you can tell me you don't believe it, but the perception is this. And
Yeah.
as I get to know them, I can usually identify the blind spots. Some leaders need to belong, and they will act accordingly, even though it's not in the best interest of the organization, to get the applause necessary to satisfy that.
Yeah.
So it truly, every individual has their own blind spots. I think that I call there's two terms that my coach, my people in the coaching process use. First, they may call me a Sherpa,
Yeah.
because there's and by the way, I coach about legacy. That's where I get off. Really, the energy resides. And if you want to be if you want to know how to do time management, oh my Lord, there's 1,000 people can do that. Just find one. Read a book. I mean, but if you're talking about legacy, this is a journey, and it requires a commitment. So, but the other thing that as I bill myself is, I'm a fool. In medieval times, the king, that little gesture at the bottom of the throne, who sat there, and everyone looks at that and thought he was an entertainer or an imbecile. That's not the function he served. He was given the opportunity to tell the king the truth because he was seen as crazy. Now, the king had been anointed by divine right to be the king. Anyone who challenged the king challenged God. That was heresy. Get your head cut off. However, if you were crazy, the rules don't apply. So the gesture, the fool, was capable of sitting there listening to the decision-making process, and when he saw that the king was going to make a mistake, he would jump up, caper about, and tell the king, "You're wrong. Don't do that." I believe that that's the job of a coach. And so I insert myself into the decision-making process. That means I will be at a meeting with your executive team, and I will be the silent observer, because I need to see you. I understand we've got the 360. Maybe I'll even do focus groups, but I like to see the leader in reality, in real time, interact.
Yeah.
Based off of that, I'm able to see those blind spots. Do you need acceptance? Do you want to belong? Are you looking for applause? I start to see your needs. And based on that, and the behavior that I can attach to those needs, and I've got a list of 10 that I go through that are most common. We're all human beings. It's amazing how much we share. And based off watching that interaction over 2 or 3 meetings, I'm able to say, let me tell you what I have observed happens when that happens. Your behavior changes. You may, for instance, a knee-jerk reaction. If someone touches one of your blind spots, you may immediately make a harsh decision or shut them down in front of the group because it's that blind spot, right? And I tell them, you're squelching communication. You're telling people, be careful what you say, because if you say the wrong thing, there's a radical reaction to that. And over the course of 2 or 3, we identify, and by the way, out of the 10, I'll find only 3.
Yeah.
I've found that if you go more than 3, people are overwhelmed. And the reality is, it is your personality, but you're in charge of your behavior.
Yeah.
Once you recognize the trigger, you are aware and can then modify behavior accordingly. But it is a process. It is a process.
I could talk to you forever, Paul, but I need to start winding her up, unfortunately.
Okay.
So Paul, who's inspired you in your leadership journey?
Well, and if you want a couple of people that I react well with, Malcolm Gladwell's one. I love his out-of-the-box approach to life, to things. Tom Peters, I just enjoy.
Yeah.
I enjoy his enthusiasm. I enjoy the way that he is just telling you, it's broken, fix it. And I don't want to hear you can't fix it, and I don't want to hear you don't think it's broken. So anyway, I enjoy that. Let's see, I obviously made a list. Thomas Freeman.
Okay.
And so it's a variety. I just like a variety because it gives me a better perspective if I get
Yeah.
a variety of opinions and viewpoints.
Yeah. Excellent. Good way to think. I love being challenged by other people's thoughts and opinions. And often what that makes me do is go research a little bit more and say, well, what they're saying makes sense. What I'm thinking makes sense. What's going on here? I need to find out more. So, what about? I've got a bit of a glimpse of what this might look like, but what's your relationship with failure?
Well, obviously, I have failed monumentally.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you think you're having a bad day, let me tell you about my bad days. And obviously, it's a robust relationship. Like
Yeah.
I said, I said it earlier, I mean it. I embrace it. And by the way, I continue to fail. We all do. If we're taking that risk, and I believe if I'm on a journey with a client, I have to take risks for them.
Yeah.
I have to show them the path, and that means that the path can be slippery. And by the way, every once in a while, I'll lose a client because they don't want to take the risk, but I'm there with them. So I expect to fail.
Yeah.
I embrace it, and I take the time to reflect, learn from it, and improve. That doesn't mean I get away from failure, but I raise the bar of what failure has to look like to impact me negatively.
Wow. That's that's a great way to think about it. So raising the bar of failure, I love it. So, what about your vision? What does that look like?
Well, I mentioned how I coach for legacy. My vision is to help leaders create their legacy because in the process, I create my legacy.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I don't run a company. I don't manufacture. What I do, there used to be a commercial, by the way. It was, I think, BASF. It said, we're not the carpet, we're the chemical in the carpet. So you don't really see us, but we're part of the carpet. That's the way I like to think that I'm operating. I should not be the guy that's the face of anything in the organization, except the person you can have an honest, candid conversation with who will have an opinion and share it. Because I can't, I know that most coaches do not like how I coach, but I don't believe in letting somebody go down for the third time.
Yeah.
I think that the first couple of times, I'm waiting for you to come up with the answer. And at some point, I'm like, you can't, you're not going to get there. Therefore, I need to assist in a way that is, let me give you something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tell people, I have an opinion about everything. That doesn't mean you should take it. But I
Yeah.
will let you hear it so that it prompts or stimulates the conversation. So back to this. Yeah, what I'm interested in is creating my own legacy, but doing it through the success of others.
Yeah. Great legacy.
By the way,
And
this is completely the opposite of who I was as a lawyer. As a lawyer, I wanted the spotlight. I
yeah.
wanted to be the center of attention.
And I also, once again, I'm resonating with the way you coach because often, especially like I'll be called into an organization. I might have 20 leaders to coach, and 5 of them love the concept and willingly jump in. 10 of them, yeah, it's an hour once a month, and I've got to do it. And then there's 5 that are just so adamant that they don't want it and don't need it. That it becomes like the first time I encountered that style of leader, it felt like an interrogation. I walked away thinking, my God, have I just interrogated someone for an hour trying to get them to speak? And it was horrible. And so one of the things that, and I'm sure based on who you are, Paul, you would follow a fairly similar thing. The storytelling component starts to make an impact with people like that. You can share a story around something. So instead of just having a relentless line of questioning, which is what I did in my probably early days of coaching, all of a sudden, instead of questioning, I'd just share a story about something that I wanted an answer for. I wanted them to think about. And it sort of opened up the concept in many of them that, oh, I'm not on my own. I'm not the only one. This could be of benefit for me. That sounded interesting. All of a sudden it tweaked a little bit of interest. And I've got no doubt that something similar is part of your process as well. That power of storytelling for a coach is incredible.
it is, and you're absolutely right. Asking people questions without context does nothing. They give you yes or no answer. We're always saying we're going to open an open-end question. Yeah, well, here's my answer. No. So, oh, okay. What do I do with that? No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to engage, and you do it through the storytelling process. And by the way, I guarantee you, with your experience, you have a story that will fit just about every person you coach, because you can say, all right, let me tell you what I think is going on here. And how do I know that? Because this is what happened to me in a similar situation. Like you said, you stepped into a bad situation at a store, and this is how I dealt with it. Well, you've got an underperforming division. Let's talk about why that is, and let me tell you why I think I can help you. Here's the story. And based on that, they go, well, all right, he's not a complete idiot. First, everybody hates academics, so you don't try to be an academic with anyone. And second, you don't want to be a know-it-all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
It sort of ruins the sales process, doesn't it?
It does.
Paul, how can people connect with you? I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure that there's many in the audience that are going to want to learn more. So how can people connect with you?
Very simple, paulglovercoaching.com, and I'm on LinkedIn at Paul Glover Coaching. Yeah, that's how you get in touch with me. By the way, because I believe in spreading the message, that's why you've given me that opportunity. I appreciate it. I tell everyone, when you contact me, I will touch you back. And it may be a conversation, because I love someone who contacts me. I just had someone do that today. They sent me an email at paul@paulglovercoaching.com, and they said, you're so full of bullshit, I can't believe anybody would have you on a podcast. And I was like, I want to talk to you.
Yeah.
No, we need to have a call. And the guy was like, why? And I said, because I need to hear why you say that. And yeah, he called. We had a 20-minute conversation. He said, I still don't like you. So I'm okay with that. I don't really like you. So we had mutual disrespect, but it mattered to me, and therefore I love people who are willing to talk about something that I've talked about.
Yeah. And one of the best things about that conversation, Paul, is that you both walked away knowing something new. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and sometimes, especially in today's world, we're losing that opportunity because we're not conversing with each other. We're shouting at each other, and when we shout and lock people out of conversations, the conversation's not happening. So at least in that's a classic example where, okay, you've still walked away with your own different mindset, and there was the influencing necessarily didn't change people's thoughts or perspective, but you gained some new information. And it's what is it Kerry Patterson who wrote Crucial Conversations, the pool of shared learning. And so there it is. There's more stuff there that you now both know. I think that's a great example. So
well, and whether I like it or not, what he said is in my head. And at some point, I believe that, there was some validity, right? I mean, obviously, I am who I am, and some people, I'm an acquired taste, and some people don't like the taste. And I'm willing to at least listen to why. That doesn't mean I'm going to be different, but it's important for me to hear, hey, maybe you shouldn't say the word bullshit. Because that's offensive. Well, all right, BS will work fine for me. So I got to be conscious of that anyway.
Yeah,
so yeah,
absolutely. Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today on the Today's Leader podcast. All of Paul's links, of course, will be in the show notes. I thank you very much for your time and for your investment in Today's Leaders.
Thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you and to your audience.
And now, it's time for Tony's 2 cents.
Resilience, mental toughness, and grit. They're not personality traits, but rather they're skill sets, habits, behaviors, and attitudes that can be identified and learned. And you would have heard that from what Paul was speaking to today. I found so much value in what Paul shared with us. What have you learnt about how you overcome adversity? What have you learned whenever you've overcome adversity? Because for all of us, we have all overcome some level of adversity. Now, very unlikely that you've been to a federal prison. However, we've all had adversity that we've been able to overcome. So what have we learned from that? What did we build from that? What are some of those skills, traits, and habits that Paul talks about that helps us be more resilient and ultimately more successful? Because building resilience will build more success. And while others may count you out, building the skills of resilience ensures that you don't count yourself out. Thanks again to Paul for sharing with us today. And of course, his links are in the show notes. If you're looking to build better leadership skills, check out the Today's Leader website at todaysleader.com.au. We really are driving a leadership revolution to build tomorrow's best leaders today. Today's Leader is a collective, the mindset to make a difference, the ability to create an impact. Think and Grow Business hosts our Today's Leader Mastermind. Think and Grow Business, where we focus on personal, professional, and business growth. Book your free 30-minute discovery call right from the homepage at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au. Don't forget, wherever you are standing stronger, braver, and wiser. Don't forget the golden rule. Don't be an arsehole. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.